They were used by prostitutes as a secluded place for them to conduct business as recently as the 1930s. Boo! What's up, witches? Hope you didn't think I was ghosting you, but it's Jared, here for another episode of Real Enough Travel. Today, we're in Salem, Massachusetts, getting in the spirit of Halloween. So we're gonna check out a few museums, go on a haunted walking tour and try to find some ghosts, and try some of the local food, as always. So stick with us as we explore Salem and try to find out if all these legends about witches and magic are just a bunch of hocus pocus, or if they're actually real enough. Any trip to Salem just has to begin at the Salem Witch Museum. It's right across the street from the Salem Common, and it's a very cool place that I've been coming to since I was a kid. You have to buy your tickets online on the day of your visit, but once you're here, you'll have access to the museum's two main exhibits which reenact the trials so you can see firsthand what really happened in 1692. Once you're done at the museum, you'll know everything you need to know about the witch trials and be ready to step back in time as you explore Salem for yourself and see where everything actually went down. So welcome to our haunted walking tour of Salem. It's a perfect day for it. We got very moody weather to help set the ambiance for this ghostly journey we're about to go on. Our first stop is Wicked Good Books. This is a very cool bookstore to begin with, but it also has a little bit of a spooky side that locals believe has to do with the nearly 3 miles of tunnels located just below the building. These tunnels were used for a few centuries by smugglers and by prostitutes as a private place to conduct their business. Customers have reported seeing books literally fly off the shelves, and more recently, a contractor hired to help with the renovation in the building claimed that he saw the spectral figure of a man carrying bottles floating up a flight of stairs that no longer exists.
The next stop on our tour is Burying Point Cemetery, which was used by the town of Salem 4 centuries ago around the period of the Salem witch trials. It's also the memorial site for the Salem witch trials, and although none of the victims are buried here, it's a good place to come and reflect on what happened. Because although the trials are fascinating and have inspired a lot of legend and mythology that we still talk about today, it's important to remember the human toll and pay our respects to the lives that were lost.
So this next stop is not strictly a haunted location, but no trip to Salem would be complete without visiting Max's house from Hocus Pocus. It's a little bit out of the way. It's on the other side of Salem on Ocean Avenue, but it's worth making the trip so you can see this iconic location for yourself.
Alright, so now we're outside the Merchant Hotel. Legend says it's one of the most haunted places in Salem, and you can actually stay right here. It was formerly owned by a wealthy and influential man known as Joshua Ward. He was so well known, in fact, that George Washington himself requested to stay with him when he visited Salem during the time of the American Revolution. Now, unfortunately, Washington's stay here was cut short because in the middle of the night he woke up to the feeling that somebody was kneeling on his chest trying to suffocate him. He was so terrified that he fled Salem and never came back. So what happened? Well, as it turns out, a century earlier this house was inhabited by a man named George Corwin, the sheriff of Essex County where Salem is located. Now, Corwin was an incredibly vindictive person, and he was directly involved in the Salem witch trials. Specifically, he oversaw the execution of one of the male victims, a man named Giles Corey. Corey was sentenced to death by pressing, which means he had massive rocks placed on his chest until he died. Now, legend tells us that with his dying breath, Corey actually placed a curse on George Corwin. Maybe that's why, just 5 years later, at the age of 30, Corwin died of a heart attack. By the time of his death, George Corwin was one of the most hated men in Salem. His family worried that if he was buried in public, the people would dig up his body and desecrate it. So instead, they buried him in the basement of this house. Maybe that's why guests who stay at the Merchant here in Salem still claim they can feel George Corwin sitting on their chest, strangling them, and demanding that they confess. I don't think Jared and I are going to be checking in here anytime soon. Alright, just a quick detour detour, before we get back to our walking tour, I just popped in Silver Moon Comics, which is located in the Witch City Mall here in Salem, to get an early Christmas present for Jared. No guessing what it is. It's a really special place for him because he got his very first comic book here, so I think he's gonna be surprised. But on a related note, we have a quick PSA for you guys. All right, Jared, tell the people what they want to hear.
So like Jess said, this is where I bought my first ever comic book. So it's fitting that we've come full circle because Jess and I are very excited to announce that we're now releasing a comic book of our own. It's a very sexy superhero satire called Jane Christ.
Our Kickstarter campaign for Jane Christ issue 1 launches tonight, October 19th. I'll put the link down below in the description. Make sure you guys check it out. We couldn't be more excited to share it with you.
So now we're outside of the Ropes Mansion. It's actually part of the Peabody Essex Museum, but you may recognize it as the home of Allison from a little movie called Hocus Pocus. During the American Revolution, this was the home of a man named Nathaniel Ropes. And unlike most of his colonist peers, he was actually a loyalist, and he remained loyal to the British crown. And one day, an angry mob gathered outside of his house, banged on his door, and demanded he come out and explain himself. Thing is, he never actually came out because he was inside dying of smallpox. But it's not Nathaniel who haunts this place to this day. It's actually his daughter Abigail, who died just a few years later when she had a little accident trying to light her fireplace. That might explain why in 2009 there was another catastrophic fire here. When they were rebuilding, some of the contractors smelled smoke in the house, and one of them followed the smell downstairs to a room that used to be Abigail's. He threw open the door, and inside was a woman engulfed in flame and disappeared in a puff of smoke.
The next stop on our tour, right behind me, is the so-called Salem Witch House. Now, no witches actually lived here, but the house was lived in by one of the judges in the Salem witch trial, a man named Jonathan Corwin. If the name Corwin sounds familiar to you, it's because we just visited Jonathan's nephew, George Corwin's house, a few stops back. Now, it's said that Jonathan actually volunteered to be a judge on the trials after another judge stepped down with a guilty conscience over all the innocent lives that were being lost. Jonathan, however, went to his grave, never having expressed any remorse for the role he played in the Salem witch trials.
So our final stop on the tour is Turner's Seafood. In this century, it's a popular restaurant here in town. But 4 centuries ago, this was the location of the apple orchard owned by Bridget Bishop. Now, Bridget Bishop was the first woman accused of witchcraft and hanged during the witch trials. But even before she died, she was not popular in her Puritan community. She was very loud and liked to wear the color red, which clashed with the norms of the time of wearing very plain clothing. These days, visitors to Turner's Seafood report smelling the scent of apples wafting through the air, even though the orchard has been long gone. And some even claim to see a woman in red still aimlessly wandering her former home. When it's time to get a bite to eat here in Salem, there are a bunch of great restaurants to choose from. We started off at Flying Saucer Pizza Company. It's a really great pizza joint that has a lot of unique toppings, and they're all themed around geeky TV, movies, etc. We got personally the Nick Fury and Marvin the Martian pizzas, and let me tell you, they're out of this world.
Another offbeat restaurant option is the Howling Taqueria, serving up food that's so good, it's scary. It's an award-winning place that's literally a 2-minute walk from Essex Street. It's got a great vibe, the staff is really friendly, and they've got a huge menu to choose from, depending on what you're in the mood for. Our waiter recommended the Howling Wolf burrito to Jared, which was bigger than his head, and I got a plate of the Al Pastor specialty taco. And in the spirit of Halloween, we both got the blood orange limeade, which was also amazing. So if you're in Salem and you're feeling hungry like the wolf, make sure you stop in here for a bite.
So that's the end of our trip to Salem. Hope you guys have enjoyed coming along with us. It has been a wicked good time here.
Might even say it was magical.
So we're ending the trip here on Essex Street. It's kind of been rained out tonight, as you may have noticed, but it does help add to the spooky feel of the city. This is a nice spot. It's got a lot of shops, restaurants, even some museums, and a psychic or two.
Now, I'm no psychic, but you don't have to be psychic to know that there's a lot of travel in our future.
So make sure you like and subscribe so you never miss a trip with us.
Until next time, I've been Jess.
And I've been Jared.
And this trip to Salem has been
Real enough.